it can be very powerful and impactful if you know how to travel with better intention. So I think traveling needs to be informative, transformative, and restorative.
But sometimes for me, my healing is even going to conflict zones. It sounds ironic, but in the conflict zones.
It's like watching a horror movie to make your life seem less scary.
And then the Buddha said, the real book, the real truth is the truth without words, the wordless truth. And
it's
because
very Taoist.
Yeah, it's very Taoist. I think it's a combination between Buddhism and Taoism.
Yes.
Welcome to Shelf Therapy, the podcast where literature meets inspiration. We are passionate about bringing the magic of books to the young readers, especially in Indonesia. In each episode, we dive into conversations about books and how it can profoundly impact your lives and in hopes can help you navigate yours. We would really appreciate your support by subscribing to this channel. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below and please leave us your feedback so that we can grow together. This season, we are shooting at the comfort of Bumi Kinar's library in Ubud, so I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude for them for lending us their beautiful space. I hope that you enjoy the podcast. Today, we are with Jinyoung Lim and Agustinus Wibowo. Jinyoung Lim is a PhD candidate in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultural Studies at UC Santa Barbara. His debut book, The Dao of Flow, integrates classical texts with his experiences in, sorry for my pronunciation, Taiji Quan, Taoism, Zen, tea culture, agriculture, conservation, art history, geography, politics, and social economics. Previously, he was a Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua University and served as program coordinator at the Berggruen Institute's China Center. He is also a co-founder at the Spawo Foundation, a nonprofit focused on holistic education, sustainability, health and wellness, and cultural preservation in the Himalayas. Agustinus Wibowo, an Indonesian travel writer of Chinese descent, explores identity through his global journeys. Having spent 3 years in Afghanistan as a journalist, he engages with remote borders and minority groups. His work redefined Indonesian travel literature, allowing readers to experience the author's physical and emotional journey while reflecting on their own conflicts. His third book, the best-selling memoir, Zero, When Journeys Take You Home, is set to be adapted into a Netflix series. His latest work, Us and Them, delves into the roots of human identity and conflict, published in 2014. Wow, congratulations.
Sorry, 2024.
Oh, sorry, 2024. So good to have both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi.
Thank you so much. Been practicing my Chinese this morning. Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to talk to both of you today because travel and wellness are topics that I'm very passionate about. And I think also a lot of people are very into travel and wellness these days. So I'm really excited to have you guys and talk to you more about that and more about books. But before we go deeper into our topic and books, I want to get to know you guys a little bit better. So I just want to understand or find out a little bit more about your childhood in terms of your relationship with literature, with reading and writing. Who would like to start?
You first.
Since Abang.
Oh yeah. Monggo.
Okay, so I grew up with stories that was read by my mom before, like my bedtime stories, books from China. And as I didn't understand Chinese at that time, my mother was like translating orally the books for me. And the book that changed my life since my childhood was The Journey to the West. Have you heard about this?
Sounds very familiar.
The
but I haven't.
Monkey King, maybe it's easier for you to. The Sun Wukong.
Kerasakti.
Yeah. Many
Yes.
Indonesians know Monkey King better.
Yes.
Yeah, The Journey to the West is a story of
And sorry, I think sorry to interrupt, but I think we also have different forms of
Yeah.
Kerasakti
Yeah.
in China, in India,
Yeah.
in Hinduism,
Yeah.
in Buddhism, etc. So
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Yeah, and because the Chinese one is also inspired, I think, was inspired by the Indian culture, because the story is about the Buddhist monk who traveled from China and during the Tang Dynasty to India to get the scripture of the Buddhists. And the monk was a real person, a historical person, the monk Tang Xuanzang. And he was a very avid travel writer in the 7th century. And the book that he wrote, and also the work that he did, like translating the Buddhist scripture to the Chinese language, changed the history of China, changed the civilization of China. And he was a very important person in history. So later, an author made the fictional story combined with the Monkey King,
Right.
the Kerasakti, and then with all of other friends like the pig, the Chupache, and other things, and other characters. And many of them are actually rooted in Buddhist spirituality and philosophy. Even the Kerasakti name Wukong is also from the Buddhist philosophy. Maybe you can translate better the idea of Wukong.
Emptiness.
Five emptiness, yeah?
Yeah.
Or the emptiness, yeah.
Yes.
It's emptiness. Like Pa Jie means 8 precepts. Yeah. So this is the idea. And I think it's also influenced by the Indian culture to the Chinese story. But the way it changed me was the story of the monk traveling all the way to India. And in the myth, it was told that when he arrived in India, after all of these hurdles, the scripture that Buddha gave him was an empty paper, empty scroll. So there was nothing written on it. So he was traveling thousands of kilometers, almost died with having all of the difficulties, and then with the evils and demons. And then when he arrived, the destination, where he arrived, he just received scroll of paper without any words on it. And then he was asking the Buddha, this is the right scroll that you give me. It was not right? We need the books, the holy books and stuff. And then the Buddha said, the real book, the real truth is the truth without words, the wordless truth. And
it's
because,
very Taoist.
Yeah, it's very Taoist. I think it's a combination between Buddhism and Taoism.
Yes.
And then the Buddha said, because the people in your country is not really wise enough, so I give you the book with letters, with the words. So this is the story that give me the idea of why is that? Where we have to travel all the way. We have a destination to go. Then when we arrive to our destinations, the thing that we receive is just an emptiness.
I guess it's not about the destination,
It's
but
not.
the
Yeah.
journey.
The real book is your journey. It's not what you get at the end.
I thought
yeah.
the Buddha was gonna say, you write your own
Yeah.
book. You write
Yeah.
your own page.
Yeah, it's also, you can understand in that way. Yeah. But
So,
yeah.
how old were you approximately when your mother read the story to you?
Yeah, it was like it's a collection of comic books. Like I don't remember, like 60 books, small comic books, and then she read for me one story per day. So when I was like 6 or something,
6.
yeah, in the primary school. Yeah.
I guess your mother really planted the seed of you becoming a travel writer since such an early age, and it hasn't really changed because it was so impactful to you.
I think it was
story.
Yeah, maybe she did it unintentionally, but I think the more intention is more like as a Chinese Indonesian at that time, when during the Suharto time where the Chinese culture was suppressed, she wanted to implant the identity of Chineseness in me. So the stories that she read to me was mostly stories from China.
And she got the books.
Yeah, she
in
got the books.
China.
Yeah, from China.
And so she was translating it to you to Bahasa.
Yeah,
Indonesia.
orally. Yeah, because I didn't speak Chinese at that time. She was not in Bahasa even. It's in Javanese. Yeah.
Oh, Javanese.
Yeah, we speak Javanese at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in East Java, in Lumajang. That's under the Mount Meru, Semeru. It's the holy mountain for the Hindus and Buddhists as well. So, yeah.
Wow. So I guess your environment and your mother's teaching really shaped you to today, because you grew up in such a spiritual place as well.
Yeah. I think many other things, but I think I will keep the stories later because
yeah. And how about you? Were you always reading books as a kid, a young human?
Now that Agus talked about his mother reading to him, I was reminded of my own mother reading some of the Jataka tales to me when I was young, because my mom is a Buddhist. But after that, I remember going into elementary, life has turned into a little bit sad because I was only reading lots of essay books because we wanted to learn Malay, English, Chinese, and we needed to learn how to structure writing. And I never really learned to appreciate literature or literary works until the last year of my high school. I was transferred to a Canadian international school in Kuala Lumpur. And there was one Canadian Black woman who was our teacher. And she taught us English based on a book called Visions Across the America. And it's a collection of short writings by some of the most prolific writers in the US. I remember there was Ursula Le Guin in there. There was Martin Luther King's speech. And we also read The Great Gatsby with her. And I really thank her for sort of illuminating my idea of how reading could be enjoyable if you actually have a conversation with the text. And so she would assign us to go back home, read a piece of writing, come back to class with a couple of things. One is it's kind of a synopsis of it. What is the main thesis of it? And she wants it in sort of a very short few sentences. And then what are the main 3 arguments of that writing? And what do you think about those arguments? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Do you like the story or do you dislike the story? And we would come to class and discuss it with our friends. And I think that really opened up my mind how reading could be powerful as a pedagogical tool.
And almost in a way, how your opinion matters.
Yes.
Right? Because you get to analyze a story and share what you think about it as well. So that's really interesting. So how about your relationship with travel? Did you feel like reading was a form of travel?
Yeah. Well, should I go first this time?
Yeah, sure.
I think the human experience in and of itself is a traveling experience, because we're born into this world as a baby. We didn't know where we come from. And then we travel with so many different people throughout different periods of our life. First with our family, and then with our friends, and then we build extended families. And then we all travel on this journey towards death eventually. And I think going on a travel or an expedition is, in a way, a microcosm of that macrocosm of traveling. It can be very powerful and impactful if you know how to travel with better intention. So I think traveling needs to be informative, transformative, and restorative. So in China, I mean, there's a saying called 知行合一, which means like the unity of knowledge and action. And I think that is sort of the informative and transformative part. So you go to a new place, you want it to understand and learn about the local culture. That's informative. But after the traveling, and even during the traveling experience, how can you be transformed? What lessons can you bring back home that would change your own life? And the final component of restorative is important, because you don't want to be just pushing and burning yourself out and coming back to your own life and feeling tired. So I try to find a balance between these 3. And I think in order to better do it intentionally, so sorry, I'm going too long.
No worries.
But in a recent talk, I said that in life, I think we need to find a balance between intentionality and spontaneity. Setting the right intentions, doing the planning, but then along the way, allowing things to happen spontaneously. And if you do find a good balance between the two, then you find serendipity, creativity. And so the way I think people should be intentional about traveling is I give a model of observation, immersion, understanding, and integration. So you go to a new place, you observe by hearing, by asking questions, by seeing, and then you immerse yourself with all your 5 senses in that community, and you try to understand why people act the way they do.
Yeah.
I think one big piece missing as well about traveling is just the moment of reflection, because I feel like we live in the world today where we're always on to the next thing.
Yeah.
We're always trying to be busy and occupy ourselves with what's next. I think that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to start writing and sort of create my own blog, just so that after every moment, I get that time where I look back and remember, because I'm realizing, I don't know if it's age, but I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I forgot like what happened last week and all these things. So writing really just, reminds us of our journey, which I think is really important as well. But that's really interesting. And with books, it's not just reading a place, but imagination travels. And I think that's when I realized why books are so important, because it allows our imaginations to go to places as well, instead of just us physically traveling.
Right.
And how about you? What do you think is reading like? What's your experience with reading? And do you see it as a form of traveling as well?
Yeah, as you mentioned before about the spirituality thing, I think I grew up with all of these conflicts, not only being the race minority, but also by living in Indonesia, grew up in the Buddhist family. My parents raised me with the Buddhist, Chinese Buddhist stories. And then I go to the Christian school, and then I learn about the Christian stories. And then this also conflicting. Some of the stories are conflicting, and it somehow books give me the shelter where I found sanctuary in some books, the spiritual books, where I can find the wisdom of all religions combined in one book without being, like clashing to each other. So yes, for me, reading is kind of helped me to understand the culture, the religions that I don't really belong. So I can understand and I can learn how to see the world from their perspective. And it helped me a lot. So the book I was talking about was The Song of Birth, written by Anthony de Mello. He is a Catholic priest, but he wrote a book with the Zen contemplative meditative stories from Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic cultures, and also Christian cultures. It's very, very powerful book that I read in my childhood. And after that, I realized, oh my God, there was so much of wisdom in India, in Africa, in China, in Japan. And all of this wisdom is so universal. And that encouraged me to travel. And maybe because I read this kind of book in my growing up years, I think it was in my secondary age. And it gave me the idea about the journey. First, it's about to discover the meaning, discover the truth, discover the essence, and also to understand our real self, to answer the question of who am I? Especially because of being a minority, I was keep asking myself whether I'm Chinese or I'm Indonesian, or whether I'm Buddhist or I'm Christian. So this kind of conflict, who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
Being mixed race.
Being mixed race.
Third generation.
Yes, the identity issues. And then I think after reading this kind of meditative books, I learned that the most important journey is the journey to understand yourself. The journey to understand self. But the inward journey is very hard. How can we understand ourselves? It's like I can see our eyes and our mouth is located on the same face, but our eyes cannot see our own mouth. We need mirror, we need a reflection. And I found the physical journey, that we go to a place, we go to a community that is totally different from us, is the way for us to see the reflection of ourselves. So I use my physical journey, traveling to different places, different countries, and especially countries with conflicts, to the border zones, and then to the minority areas, actually is also reflecting the conflict inside of me.
Right. So if we travel to a place and we don't also at the same time do an internal inwards travel to discover ourselves, that travel would be maybe more meaningless or like a form of escape.
Yes.
I see the word escapism as more of a negative, has a negative connotation compared to travel. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think escapism is kind of escape for the real life. But the true traveling is the life itself. Because life is a journey. And then the physical trip, the so-called the vacation or the trip that you make.
That's escapism.
Yeah, but it is still part of your life anyway.
It's still part of travel.
Yeah, but if you see it that way, of course not everybody.
I guess the reason why I love traveling too, and the travels that means a lot to me are the travels where it enriches me in a way, or I discover something about myself, or it gives me peace. I think that's more important.
Yeah, maybe different people has different urge, because when you say in Buddhist term, everybody has different karma, and it creates your different personality, your different motives, and your different self. And then the journey that you take is also different. But I think as humans, we have many universal and commonality. We have also the tendency to understand and then seeking for meaning. Especially when you grow older, some people do it even younger to seek for the meaning. For me, when I saw the meaning is I meet a situation, and then this situation I can reflect it to myself, and it solved my problem, it solved my issues, and it make me peaceful. So it doesn't matter when you talk about healing or calming places, like healing doesn't necessarily need to you go to calming places like Ubud, or you say California or something. But sometimes for me, my healing is even going to conflict zones. It sounds ironic, but in the conflict zones,
it's like watching a horror movie to make your life seem less scary. No?
Maybe a little bit different.
Okay.
Because, like, I give you an example. When I was in the in Kashmir, in India, in Srinagar, this is a place with a separatist issue. Like there is an independent movement from the Kashmir people, who is majority Muslim, living in India, which is majority Hindu.
Yes.
And then there was impose of identity, restriction of identity among them, and there is created much more of the repulsion towards the country they are living in. So when I came to this kind of place and listen to the people, listen to their anger, I cover both sides. I talk with the Indians, the Hindu Indians. I talk with the Hindu Kashmiris. I talk with the Muslim Kashmiris. Because I'm not involved in the problems, I'm not involved in their history, I can see the history more objectively. And then it reflected to me, living as a Chinese Indonesian, and I have to learn how can I take from their lessons, living in this kind of situation, and how we can live in Indonesia with these minority issues, with this separatist issue, and how can I make peace with my conflict. So I saw many similarities. For example, one Kashmiri guy told me when he was young, he was watching cricket match. Cricket is like football in Indonesia. People in India are very much into it. Between India and Pakistan. And as Kashmiri, your passport is Indian. Your citizenship is Indian. But when they watched the match, they were all rooting for Pakistan. So when Pakistan scored, they all hailed, they were happy. And then when the India scored, they were praying to God, asking for miracles for Allah to do. So the cricket match became like a holy war.
Right.
So it reflected to my childhood when I was having this kind of confusion whom I have to root for when I watch badminton match between China and Indonesia. Like, should I root for Indonesian team or should I?
My problem with it's Indonesia versus Australia.
Yeah, you feel that, yeah. So I reflected that, and then I said like, okay, so this is just identity issues, and after I saw their issues and I understand the root, I can make peace with my own, and it doesn't really matter for me. Now I don't care whether I root for China or I root for Indonesia. It's the same,
Right.
because I grab all my identities are as my colors of life. So I think the way of healing through travel, you can do healing even going to conflict zones, as long as you can take the meaning from there.
That's a very interesting way to put it. So you write because you travel, and I assume you write not just for yourself, but to share this experience, because you often mention about how you want people here back home in Indonesia to see the bigger picture and what's happening around the world, and sort of apply to what's going on in the country itself.
I think the earth started from inner. So the earth starting from make peace with my own identity conflict. When we talk about the peace in the world, it cannot be started if the people don't have the peace with themselves. So peace with self, I think, is very important to create a peaceful world. And I think before I can write books about conflict and peace, I have to make peace with my own identity conflicts.
I agree. I think with problems within Bali, for example, Bali has so many problems now with infrastructure and over tourism, which I don't think it's over tourism. I think it's just a lack of organization and
management,
governance. I do believe it starts with more internal problems of the people that are actually leading the country. For instance, their values has been corrupted, etc. But anyway, let's talk about your expeditions to the Himalayas.
Sure.
I also want to know about how your travels sort of influence your writing, or when did you start traveling? Why Himalayas? Like, how did that come about?
Well, I think my first real traveling experience, which I just mentioned to Agus a while ago, was going to Myanmar when I was in high school and backpacking with my mom's group of friends. And it was the first time where I felt vulnerable with this group of aunties.
I was gonna say, did you say your mom's group of friends?
Yes. My mom wasn't
backpacking
there. My mom wasn't there.
To Myanmar with your aunties.
Yes. And
that's so funny.
We were just hopping from one hostel to the next, not sure what's going to happen the next day. And all I have to do was to trust the aunties.
Yeah.
But later on...
Were you forced?
No, I wasn't forced.
Were you dragged?
I really wanted to go to Myanmar.
Oh, you really wanted to go. They were going. So you were like, okay.
Yep. But that turned out to be a very spiritual and very fulfilling trip for me. Remember walking around Bagan and was just mesmerized by all the pagodas over there. And now looking back, it's very hard to go to Myanmar right now with the conflict going on. But it opened up my eyes to the fun enjoyment of traveling without any expectations. And so the following year, I went to Fukushima in Japan for a short volunteering program. This was 2 years after the earthquake and tsunami. And in my book, I wrote about this experience. I call it the Kizuna experience because it taught me about the interconnectedness of human life. I saw how Japanese were flocking into Fukushima from different parts of the country to support the local people. And there was, I also wrote about this Zen priest who was trying to decontaminate Fukushima and his story of, planting lots of sunflowers to cheer up the people, of cleaning up the waste after the incident. And it inspired me to go to Japan to pursue my undergrad. But before going to Japan, I made my first trip to Ladakh, which is a place very close to my heart. And now I have a nonprofit over there. I go there every summer. And Ladakh is a very Tibetan Buddhist or Himalayan Buddhist influenced region, very much like Bhutan, Sikkim, and Tibet. And ever since 2018, I've been going back to Ladakh every summer, except during the pandemic. And going back again and again to the same place, I think has taught me way more about myself and about the meaning of traveling than going to multiple places. Because I feel like with every cycle or cyclical visit to Ladakh, I'm uncovering new stories of the same people, of my Ladakhi family over there. I am noticing changes in Ladakh, how, of course, capitalism and how India is influencing it and how the environment is deteriorating. And it gives me a strong urgency to preserve the ecology over there, the ancient wisdom and traditional culture. And that's why we started this nonprofit there to work with local indigenous mentors. And we also bring American students there every summer to interact with the local kids and try to foster intercultural exchanges for them.
Right.
Yeah.
I see it as like a way, the further away that people take nature away from us, the more we want it because it's part of us.
Yep.
So, because I see this happening in Bali as well, you know, a lot of so many changes, a lot of changes because of capitalism, etc. But I was curious whether you were always spiritual or religious, or was it enhanced because of your travels and your experiences? Were you
really.
like this back
I
home?
think so. I was spiritual growing up as a kid. My mom would send us to Sunday schools to learn about Buddhism. And then I joined a few Zen or Chan retreats when I was young. When I was 13, I started training in martial arts in Shaolin. And then I think Shaolin, or most form of martial arts, you know, are in a way spiritual. And when you're in your body practicing a sequence, your mind, body, and breath has to be aligned, right? And it is a form of moving meditation. And so from Shaolin, I transitioned into Tai Chi, which is a Tai Chi Chuan, a form of, I would consider it a mixture of Taoism and martial arts. And it opened up my mind to the philosophy of Taoism, because Tai Chi Chuan is a martial arts that embody the principles of Taoism, the idea of moving without using brute force.
I love that.
Yeah. And how you can sort of incorporate or infuse that spirit into your day-to-day life. And these days, I become a yoga teacher as well.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. So
welcome to Yoga Land.
Yoga Land. But I find myself resonating with a lot of the high philosophy of Eastern religions, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, or Taoism. I think they all, and including mysticism in the monotheistic traditions, I think they all speak to something much more deeper in our heart. Something that one of my recent mentor that I met, Stephen Murphy Shigematsu, he uses the word heartfulness.
Heartfulness.
Yeah.
I want to write that down.
Yeah,
Heartfulness.
not mindfulness. And I really agree with him that heartfulness is a better way to encapsulate mindfulness, because the word mindfulness comes from 正念 or 念 in Japanese, means like the current heart or heart right now. And sometimes when they translate 念 into mindfulness in the Western context, it feels too intellectual. It feels too much cerebral.
Yeah.
But it is something in the heart
Yes.
that you have to embody spiritually and practice in your day-to-day life.
I totally agree. Next, we're going to have the word gutfulness.
Gutfulness, yes.
I don't know how good that sounds. I feel like there's no way, with so many changes happening around the world, you constantly going back to Ladakh, you see the changes happening. There's no way there's no disturbances within ourselves too. What do you think are the challenges that comes with the changing environment and sort of trying to stay intact with our spirituality and with our true nature? Have you ever thought about like, wait, my environment is changing. Am I changing without even realizing it as well?
Yeah, I think I never really thought that much about this question, because we were brought up in that value system where impermanence, anicca, is a constant in our reality. Change is the only constant. Wait, what was the term? Change is the only constant, I think.
Change.
Yeah.
The only unchanging is changing.
Yeah, the only thing that's unchanging is change. And so I feel very comfortable with the passing of time. And this year in particular, like I lost my very close mentor
I'm so sorry.
and a very close friend in Penang. So 2 people passed away, and I grieve and I mourn, but I have to accept. And I understand that there's a part of them that lives on in me, that by remembering them, they're still alive. And so back to your question on how we can adapt to change. I think one is acknowledging that we ourselves are impermanent, that we're also changing, that we're not the same as the kid we were 10, 20 years ago, and that we are capable of changing toward a better self. And even though things around us are moving, sometimes it might not be something that we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
But how do we accept it? And I think contemplative practices comes into play here. And traveling can be a form of contemplative activity, meditation, yoga, tai chi, qigong, or even simply having a cup of tea with a friend is a contemplative activity for me. Having a meaningful conversation,
agriculture,
yes, and try to come back to rooting yourself in something that brings you closer to Mother Earth, to your inner self, I think.
How do you face challenges? I mean, I feel like so many of us are struggling these days because we've either become more individualized or absorbed in our own worlds, because our world now is a square box, a phone, where we're sort of it's just us and the phone, and we're inside the black hole of the social media and dunia maya, digital world.
So
how do you navigate that?
I think when we talk about mindfulness, there are two things we are talking here. First is we have to be aware. Being mindful is being aware of what we are doing every time, what we are thinking, and what is happening inside us all the time. Why we can scroll, because it's really addictive, right? To scroll, and then you have this dopamine in your head, and it's like it's very nice just laying down and then keep scrolling, and then suddenly 1 hour, 2 hours just lapse, and then what you do is like looking of people having better life, looking at people having better fashion, and then you start to compare. Oh, they have better life, and my life is struggling. And this kind of cycle makes you become more unhappy and unhappy. First is to be aware of what you are doing at this moment. And then the second thing is like what Jin has mentioned before, is to be aware all the time about changing. The changing phenomenon happens not only about the situation all around us, that ourselves is also changing. Every part of us is also changing, and we are going closer and closer to death. It's not like negative or sad thinking about death all the time.
That's the only certain.
It's the only certain thing.
Unfortunately.
But when you realize that you have limited time on earth, and then you realize that everything you are maybe angry for, or maybe you are unhappy for, it's just very small things compared to your journey of life, compared to your death, compared to the civilization itself. So you can put your life in more proper proportion. Sometimes we are just occupied with some quarrel with our friends, and then it makes us sad, angry the whole time. But when you are aware of the sensations, aware of the changing, anicca, and then you realize, oh, it doesn't really important, and then you can move on faster. But of course, it's not as easy as they say. You need practice, and then the mindfulness, meditation, reflection, contemplation is part of the practice, and it's a long practice, and it's a lifelong practice.
And like not everyone has the time for it now.
But they have more time to scroll. And
I mean, it's about priorities, right? But I'm realizing as we speak that we're all in a journey. We're all traveling. We have to problem solve as we go, because nobody knows what the future holds, etc.
I think the detox is part of the solution. So you need to allow sometimes in your time, like you have time for shower, you have time for eating because you think it's important. You need to make it as normal thing, and it is like your habit and important to have time for contemplation and meditation. So,
but I also believe life is a learning journey, and the key to every problem is education. So to get back into books, whenever you feel something not right, feeling challenges from the world, you have a book that you go to, a go-to book for problems or anything like this?
For me, I always go back to the Dao De Jing, which is this book over here. And there's so many translations of the Dao De Jing. This is my favorite one. It's translated by a mentor of mine, Roger Ames and David Hall. And I think this is one of the best translations because it takes the text philosophically, and it's also very poetically translated and very concise, and it gives a very good explanation at the end of every chapter. So what I do is, I just simply flip to any chapter, open it up, and I read that chapter, and sometimes it kind of answers the problem that I was facing at that time. But I can read you one of my favorite ones right now, just really
Please.
quickly.
Would love that.
Chapter 33. All right. So, to know others is wisdom. To know oneself is acuity. To conquer others is power. To conquer oneself is strength. To know contentment is to have wealth. To act resolutely is to have purpose. To stay one's ground is to be enduring. To die and yet not be forgotten is to be long-lived. So, just simple verses like chapter 33 can really help bring you back to being grounded, and this idea of constantly improving yourself, whether it's trying to better understand other people or understanding yourself, and to be content. That's what is said in the text. Yeah.
To just relax. Just go back to the essence of what's important in life.
Yeah.
And how about you? Would you like to share anything about your experience with Dao De Jing?
Yeah, I don't really have a holy book that I keep referring when I have problems, but as you mentioned about Dao De Jing is one of very influential books also in my life. I read it in my secondary, and the first sentence of Dao De Jing was answering my issues of identity. 道可道非常道，名可名非常名。The way that can be taken is not the real way. The name that can be named is not the real name. So I face this issue about the meaning of God because many different religions calling different God. I have conflict between my two beliefs, like I believe Christianity and Buddhism at the same time at that time. So then the name, the truth that can be said as truth is not the real truth. The truth has no name. Yeah. So we don't need to be confined by the name of the religion because the truth can be anywhere. So I think this is how Dao De Jing helped me to understand. And I found many reflection in the stories that I read in the Anthony de Mello books. Anthony de Mello collect small fable wisdom stories from different cultures. And one of the story I can read for you, but maybe it's easier or it's more interesting if I retell the stories by my own. This is written in the Song of Birth, and I quoted as well in my book Us and Them, because this story also show the issues of identity conflict. So the story is about Jesus watching a football match. So
that sounds fun.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. We take Jesus to watch a football match between the Christian, Protestant, and the Catholic clubs. And then when the Protestant scores, Jesus cheered. And then when the Catholic scored, Jesus also cheered. And all of the people behind him was confused. Who is he really rooting for? And this guy asked Jesus, "Who are you rooting for, my friend?" And Jesus said, "I'm not rooting for any clubs. I'm just enjoying the game." And this guy then really looked down, and then he make a comment, "Oh, he's just an atheist." Yeah. So sometimes you don't need to root for any sides. You just enjoy the game. You just learn from the game.
That's so interesting how you had kind of pressure to identify with one religion. See, I never really had that problem. In fact, I love learning about religions because of the wisdom within every religion, and I do believe that there's only good intentions in all the the essence of the religion itself to guide us through our travel, our journey of life.
Yeah.
So that's really
So because there is a
interesting.
difference.
I think it's more the society then.
Yeah, because there is a difference between spirituality and religion. Religion, they said religion is the way to spirituality, but spirituality is more about experience and religion is more about faith. And to reach spirituality doesn't necessarily you need to go through religion. You can be spiritual even without religion, because spirituality is about experiencing the truth, experiencing the so-called God, or experiencing the so-called nature.
Right.
And that is spiritual.
I guess that's why I can also accept all religions, because I resonate more with being a spiritual person rather than religious person.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Anyway, speaking of reading and traveling again, I was wondering if, because you read a lot of books, does it change the way that you travel? Have you ever also heard, it's really trending, I forgot what it's called, but there are people who go travel to, let's say, Melbourne, and then they read a book that was set in that city. I was just wondering if that's like something you do that sort of enhance your travel experience, besides writing about travel.
Okay, go first.
Sure. So for me, reading does really help enhance your traveling experience. And for me, if we use Ladakh as a model, like the book that really first transformed the way I look at Ladakh was a book called Ancient Futures, written by Helena Norbert Hodge, a Swedish linguist. And she went to Ladakh in the 70s when it first opened up to the outside world. And she saw the most pristine natural environment and the most original way of living that the Ladakhis were going through at that time. And then slowly over the decade, she went back to Ladakh again and again, and she saw how capitalism is uprooting a lot of the values and the communal lifestyle. And so she divided the book into tradition, change, and about the future. So reading that book, we made that book a textbook for all our participants, so that when they come to Ladakh, they can actually compare the ancient way, which you can still find in some of the remote villages, to Leh city, which is the main capital, where you have a lot of business activities going on. And then we sort of try to spark a conversation among our own participants. What kind of change, good or bad, did they see in Ladakh? And how does that compare to your own city or your own village back home or township? And so Ancient Futures is a really good book as a textbook. But more recently, I was conversing with the famous travel writer Pico Iyer, and he recommended me this book called A Journey in Ladakh, Encounters with Buddhism by Andrew Harvey. And this has became my favorite book of all time at the moment. It always changes over time.
Nothing is permanent.
Yeah, but I have, over the past 1 year, I think I've read this book at least 5 times. And it's just an extremely beautiful book that traverses from the physical journey into the inner journey. And he starts off with describing why he wanted to go to Ladakh, what are the obstacles that was stopping him, and then describing the nature, the taking a bus from Srinagar, which is mentioned, all the way to Ladakh. And then,
wow, how long would that take?
It's like 2 days, 3 days.
Okay.
And then finally meeting one of his root teacher in Ladakh and learning about Buddhism and Ladakh. And if I may, recently I've been thinking about this question about, okay, we're travel writers, we go somewhere, we find new stories and we write about them. Are we approximating that culture? Like what good can we bring to that community by writing about them? And then there's this, if I may share a little bit, there's this about 2 pages long that he himself, Andrew Harvey, had this dilemma when he was thinking of writing this book. And he had a conversation with a local Ladakhi. His name was Nawan Tsering. And he said, by bearing witness and writing about you, am I just approximating your culture? And Nawan listened and thought for a while, and he said, Nawan said, you are right, but our situation is even more desperate than you imagine. I think that it is almost certain that we will be destroyed as a culture, and that nothing now can save us from that destruction. Our only chance of being remembered at all may be through being appropriated and consumed, as you say, by the West, by some Westerners who have come to visit our country and have been moved by what they have found here. I'm not asking for rescue or for the sudden political and spiritual transformation of my people. It is too late to ask for that. I'm asking that something of us be saved from oblivion. You must write about us. You will get many things wrong, and you will only be able to give a limited and subjective picture of us. But if you can do that with craft and love, you will have helped us a little, and you will have given to those of us like me who are fighting to preserve something of our culture against probably impossible odds, a sense that we are not living our lives in vain, that we have friends in the world who recognize what it is we stand for.
Oh, so beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really great
Yeah.
and very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it sort of reinforces my purpose to continue writing
Mhm.
when traveling.
Surely it also gives you confidence. Like, for example, I started a little blog just for my activities and even my travels. Sometimes I fear that I don't tell a place like what it's meant to be. I can only do it through my eyes and through my experiences. So just knowing or accepting the fact that you can only do your best and do things through you and sort of be kinder to yourself about it is something that's encouraging me to keep going, because otherwise we're sort of trapped in this idea of perfectionism and we can never be accurate about anything. So it's like finding the balance on how can we share about a culture, about a place, but not corrupt it or not butcher it in a way. So that's such a beautiful piece of information that's quite helpful for me, to be honest, personally. How about you? We were talking about how, just the trend of reading a book in a place where it's written, or maybe reading books while you travel, how it sort of changed even your travel experience.
I think I started the long traveling in 2005 after I got graduated from university. And at that time, I was graduated from a technical university, and the books that I used to read before that was only technical books, engineering books. And then, but I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be someone who, a storyteller, but I don't know how to tell stories. At that time, I only knew to tell stories through photography. I wanted to be a photojournalist at that time, but I met this Malaysian journalist who recommended me to read the travel writing, because he said, if you want to learn about travel writing, just learn it by practice. So she introduced me to the books of V.S. Naipaul. V.S. Naipaul was Indian descent in Trinidad in Latin America and Caribbean. And then he traveled to India. But the book that I was reading was his travel to Islamic countries in the 1970s. So he went to Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Malaysia in early 1980s, I think, 1980 to 1982. And then I read the book, and it was the first actually a travel writing piece that I read, and it set me the standard of travel writing. Okay, so it has to be this deep, has to be this evocative, and this has to be very contemplative like this one. And the part that I really liked was, like, as you mentioned before, it's a really appropriate writing about Indonesia. It's a very Western way of seeing Indonesia. But for us Indonesians, seeing his perspective is very fresh. Oh, we never see Indonesia in this way. And it was very interesting for me to read. He's very critical. His eyes were so sharp, and he critiques everything. But the critics that he wrote was something that we Indonesians, the questions that we are not even dare to ask about religions, about traditions, how we clash between religions and tradition, how it's maintained with the modernity and stuff. It was so powerful. And now if I reread again the book, I read the book many times. It's kind of like the Bible of travel writing for me. Yeah, it was like Indonesia that we lost already. Indonesia in 1970s is nothing at all. 1980s is nothing at all like Indonesia today. It's the lost world of Indonesia. It doesn't mean that I'm nostalgic and I want to be like that, but to appreciate this kind of travel writing as a historical piece. Now, when we read this book, it's like a history piece. It's a little history, the history of common people, the people in Java, thinking about religions, thinking about the traditions. That is totally different that we can find today in today's Java. We almost cannot find this kind of examples.
I think with Indonesia, so often the stories about us are told by outsiders.
Yes.
And that's a really big problem. So I think it's important to have writers like you who are not just willing, but have that awareness to and desire to showcase stories coming from locals' perspective.
But I think, well, in Indonesia, when we are talking about the book, yes, exactly, like the book that is famous in the international market is a book written by outsiders. But Indonesians themselves, they write books and we talk a lot about our situations. But I think it's still very important for us to read these Westerners or foreigners, not only Westerners actually, Chinese or even Malaysians visiting Indonesia. They have all different perspectives and they provide us different eyes to see ourselves. I think it's still very helpful. Yes, of course, everybody is subjective. Everybody has their own perspective, but it's fine. I also use my perspective when I write about Central Asia, which is maybe different from Central Asian people seeing their own countries. But it doesn't mean that the outsider perspective is always wrong. It's just different perspective. And it's important to take this balance for us, especially when we read a perspective from outside. It can be also a constructive way for us to do retrospection and then to introspect what are we missing in our life, or what the angles that became our blind spots. For example, like everybody here, Indonesia is one of the most religious countries in the world because religion is part in the education in the school.
Yeah, even when I went to India, some Indians told me that actually you're more religious in Bali than we are here.
Yeah. So, and then because we take it for granted, we don't ask about God. We don't ask about heaven and hell. We take it for granted. But from the Western perspective, we can realize, oh, maybe this is something that we never talk. It's something that is worth to debate about. So that I think is still very important. And I, as a travel writer, of course, I have faced the dilemma that was mentioned as well in our Facebook. Yes. But again, I use this idea that all perspectives is useful if you take it for its use.
So you've been writing for a very long time. You've been a journalist. You're a travel writer. Can you take us back to the moment when you decided or wanted to write your own book?
Okay, so this is also related to what I have talked about before, the book of V.S. Naipaul, about his journey to Muslim countries, Iran, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And it helped me a lot when I traveled to Pakistan to see Pakistan is in different perspective. It was my second visit to Pakistan. My first visit was only occupied by the beautiful nature. But when my second visit, after reading this book, I started to observe what does it mean becoming an Islamic country. So I'm more involved in this observation about when religion mixed with the politics, what will happen to the society, how it changed the society. And it happened in the 2006, after the Bali bombing, like Indonesia also had faced the similar danger of facing this fundamentalism and radicalism. This book and this experience in Pakistan helped me to observe in more objective way, seeing the issues when the religion and religious politics especially occupied so much of people's life. And I wrote this. I decided that this story is worth for people to read. If I write directly about issues in Indonesia, you know how sensitive that is, like
Yes.
talking about
Yes,
the
let's not
groups.
go there.
You cannot touch this issue
Yeah.
easily.
Same in Malaysia.
Yeah,
Same as well,
I'm
right?
sure.
But when you talk about other countries, give them reflection. See in Pakistan, how can people become very illogical when they talk about
Right.
religions? I just give the reflection. Or maybe in Afghanistan as well. I wrote a book about Afghanistan, and then see how people can kill each other just because of the different way of prayers.
Wow.
This can be a reflection for Indonesians. I'm writing about Pakistan and and Afghanistan, but in fact I use Indonesian perspective to write about them, and I'm writing for Indonesians, and I'm writing about Indonesia in that way. So it's hidden writing about Indonesia, but just the mask is about Pakistan and Afghanistan. But the books was directed for Indonesians to contemplate
love
the
that.
issues.
I love a lot of fiction books write about what's happening in our world, packaged in a fiction book, in a fantasy.
I packaged it in a travel writing.
Right. Would you like to read a passage for us?
A passage?
Something from your book? Like something.
I didn't really prepare for my book, but I prepared from the book that I quoted. This is
anything, if you'd like to read anything.
So this is an issue as well about religion and culture, and then when we can be very much attached to what we think as our identity, but maybe the identity is something as a myth. So this is a story, a Zen story. Every night, when the teacher and his disciples were ready to begin their evening prayers, the cat in the temple would meow incessantly, disrupting the focus. To resolve this, the teacher ordered the cat to be tied up during the prayer sessions. Years later, even after the teacher has passed away, the cat continued to be tied up during the evening prayers.
Oh.
When the cat eventually died, the students brought a new cat to the temple, ensuring it was tied up throughout the prayers. Centuries later, generations after generations of the teacher students wrote books and scholarly commentaries about the significance, religion's meaning of the practice of tying up a cat during evening prayers.
Wow, but I think life is just a vicious cycle in itself.
That is tradition. Sometimes we take traditions without really understanding the meaning.
I mean, religion and culture and tradition sort of intertwine and become each other after some time. And I'm also curious with you, what sort of made up your mind that you wanted to write a book? How did that happen?
Yeah, so for this book, it's actually my debut book. I just published this in June, The Dao of Flow. I often trace there are several points where I decided to write a book, but one of them, perhaps the earliest one, was in 2019, I was preparing to give a presentation in Japan in a conference called Yonaoshi, Renewing the World. And my professor invited me to talk about Taoist philosophy, about flow, about my work in the Himalayas. And I titled my presentation at that time, Eco-Flow Renaissance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and
what does that mean?
The idea was that if we can get more people to enter flow states through yoga or meditation or running, and to have them transition from that flow state into a more spiritual experience, to find fulfillment in flow, in meaningful connections with people, then they would not fall into the trap of materialism and capitalism. And we need a renaissance of that in today's world. And so that was the title of my presentation. And in the train after the talk, I was thinking, actually, maybe I should expand this into a book. But then I didn't find a strong narrative backbone back then to put everything together. And then the pandemic hit in 2020. So I had a lot of time at home, and I was practicing Tai Chi every day, reflecting on my life.
Where were you in Malaysia?
I was back in Penang with
Penang.
my mom and dad, and that was the best experience ever. I feel like I was borrowing 2 years of my future retirement into the present moment back then, so that I could have quality time with my parents when they're still healthy and alive. But so I reflected a lot, and I decided one day, when I was doing Tai Chi, I suddenly realized 3 principles of Tai Chi, which is embodying water, flowing water, and regulating water. I'll leave it here as a cliffhanger so that you might potentially read my book. But
I will. Don't
but
worry. I'm very interested.
That 3 principles, I see it manifesting again and again in the lives of different people, of my mentors, of the indigenous people in Yunnan, in Ladakh, in the way people accomplish things that benefit not only themselves, but also other people. And so I tie it back to this Taoist philosophy of approximating the quality of water. And I spent about 2.5 years writing the book. Every time I finish a chapter, I send it to my closest mentor, David Hawley, who recently passed away. And we worked on the book together. He was a former LA Times foreign correspondent, and he gave me a lot of valuable feedback, some editing. And just in June this year, I finished the book and I went to see him in Japan, and I gave him a copy. And I could see in his eyes that he was very proud of me at that moment. And then he brought the book with him into the hospital, and he never came out after that.
So sorry.
So the book started from Eco-Flow Renaissance to Tai Chi trend practice to working with a mentor, and to finally Penguin Random House Southeast Asia picked it up and decided that they're gonna publish it. So it's a processual unfolding.
That's an incredible and beautiful story. I really love that. But do you have some maybe notable books or authors that sort of influence more of the technicalities on maybe how you write?
One example that I can give is, because with this book, I was trying to experiment with kind of a new genre. I was mixing a partial memoir with narratives of and stories of my mentors and other individuals with exposition on Taoist philosophy. And early on, when I shared it with different people, some people felt like it was a bit everywhere. And I shared this problem with David. And David told me, remember in one of our classes called Post-War Japan at Waseda University, I taught you guys using a book called Embracing Defeat by John Dower. The book won the National Book Award in the US, but it's about post-war Japan. And it's a historical book. But at the very beginning, they have an introduction. And the introduction basically sums up the whole book chronologically in each paragraph.
Yeah.
And so David said, maybe you can do that by jamming everything up in the beginning and explaining how the book is going to unfold to the audience, so that they wouldn't read one chapter and be like, why is this guy talking about farming and all of a sudden talking about Tai Chi Chuan and then talking about mythology, but kind of like giving them a preface so that they're better prepared to absorb whatever comes forward. So John Dower's book, Embracing Defeat, was something that I looked at the introduction again and before I structured mine. Other books include Ancient Futures. I've mentioned it a while ago. I've read the Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi many times. Zhuangzi is also another Taoist text that contains a lot of parables, fun parables and metaphors and analogies in it. And I understood that even if I'm doing nonfiction, it has to be creative nonfiction. It has to include a lot of storytelling in it in order to capture people's attention. And then I just write, I think.
Yeah. Cool. I feel like memoirs that are in a way scattered but make sense are really interesting as well. Like if I were to write a memoir, I would write just maybe short essays, because I feel like our life is never as perfectly written as a book.
Yep.
So
another book came
so
to
many
mind.
ways to.
Sorry. The Art of Learning by Josh Waiskin is also about how Tai Chi influenced his chess skills.
Chess
skills. He made
Tai Chi and chess.
He made a sort of a synergistic learning from chess and Tai Chi and how he incorporates both into his own life. And he became sort of really a top performer in both arena.
Wow.
Yeah. So that book was quite powerful too.
Do you guys play mahjong by any chance?
My dad plays mahjong.
Really? My mom
week.
plays mahjong. And she has a group of friends who she plays mahjong with, her mahjong club. And they do tournaments now.
Ooh. Wait, do you play mahjong?
No.
Oh, I was going to say, if you play mahjong, you should teach us.
No.
Yeah, but Australian ladies play mahjong.
Yes.
It's always interesting.
Australian ladies play mahjong. Well, they're not all Australian. Some are American, German, etc.
I don't even know how to play mahjong. and I'm
tried.
Chinese.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you mentioned chess. That's why I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyway, how about you? Do you have any notable authors or books that sort of inspired the way you write? Maybe.
Yeah. As I mentioned to you before about the travel writing, the V.S. Naipaul has a very strong influence for me to set up the standard of travel writing with the depth, with the analysis, and with the critical thinking. But my new book, Us and Them, it is I use the totally different way of writing. It's more into the big history. It covers a very huge topics, and then I search the history of the issues from the root. So every chapter here started with one word like nation, border, or religion. Then I will start the history of nation, border, and religion from the root, and then how it evolved to our today's life. So
you have your system.
Yeah. So it's a really big history. I was inspired by Yuval Noah Harari,
I love
Sapiens.
his book.
Yes, amazing.
Because Sapiens can encapsulate 200,000 years of human history just in one book. So after reading that, maybe I can encapsulate the history of religion, history of nation, and history of border in one book. So it came as this book. But when I started the project, then I realized, oh my God, I was facing the ocean of reference books. For example, I have to read the history of Islam. And not only one book, there are about 20 books.
I do that too. Do you get overwhelmed?
Yeah, like 350 books that I had to read. And then I was overwhelmed with the quotes that I collected from the books, like the history of the crusades, like for example, like so many books about crusades, and some books have conflicting data, and really confusing. Like there is 350 books, and if I collected the quotes, it was like I think for 140,000 words of quotes that I collected. And then how can I manage with this ocean of quotes and data? And it was really overwhelming. So it took me 6 years to finish this book.
Amazing. Did you write, I was curious, did you write in Indonesian or in English and translated?
I wrote in Indonesian,
Okay.
but my reference books mostly were English. So I translated the quotes into Indonesians, and then I contemplate the meaning of every quote, and then I wrote in Indonesian, and then I translated to English.
I see.
Yeah, so it's a long work.
Amazing. That's like a doctor's degree.
Yeah. Without degree.
Without the degree, but a book that will last forever.
Yeah, and read by so many people. Like in academia, they write lots of papers that no one really reads.
That's true. That's true. My last question is, what's next? So like, what are you working on for the next book, maybe, or project?
I want to write a book on understanding Indonesian nationalism, but most books that is written about Indonesia by Indonesians are focusing from the center perspective. I want to write it from the perspective of the periphery, the perspective of the borders. So seeing Indonesia from across the borders.
I see.
So I have done some parts of the journey. I was traveling across the Indonesian and Papua New Guinean border from the Papua New Guinean side, and then living with the Free Papuan Movement camp.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, it was very dangerous for me with my Indonesian identity.
Yes.
Because they considered Indonesians as enemy, but I managed to live with some of them and then gather some of the stories. And then I went to Holland, Netherlands, to meet the movement leaders. So the independence movement, if we call it from Indonesian perspective, they are separatist movement, but I prefer to use independence movement. So the Papuan independence movement and the South Moluccan Republic independence movement. And then I learned the history of Indonesia from their perspective. This is like hidden history in Indonesia.
You're like learning by writing.
Yeah, nobody talks about the history from their perspective. So I learned from them. And then I wanted to travel around the diaspora region. So I went to Suriname in South America to talk with the Javanese the Javanese diaspora there, and to understand the meaning of being Javanese to them. So I think this is the project that I'm doing now, to talk about Indonesian nationalism, but from the perspective from the people across the border.
Cool. I can't wait to read that. I'll start with that one first.
Okay.
And how about you? I know you just released your book, so it might be
Might take some time.
pretty early. Might take some time, and no rush, by the way.
Yeah.
Let's not rush. But yeah, what are you working on besides your next book?
There are a few
No pressure.
projects in mind. One is our nonprofit is fundraising and working on building a retreat center in Ladakh, a place where people can go there and learn about spirituality, about traditional medicine in the Himalayas, and people can also stay there and restore their health.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Chantang, which is a nomadic region in Ladakh, and very peaceful. I do hope you two can come and visit when it's.
I hope we can
so too.
collaborate.
We'll
we are
exchange
talking about
numbers
Yes.
later.
we are talking about projects already.
Yeah.
And
Actually, no
then-
projects. We're just gonna travel.
Yeah, just travel, just come and stay with us in our
Okay.
village for
Yeah.
Okay.
some time.
I'll help.
Yeah.
Volunteer.
I'll host. Yeah, we
Okay.
can do some fun.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So that's one project, and then I'm also working. I mean, I do have a second book idea coming up. I want to work on the biography of one of the most famous folk song artists in Ladakh, folk song keeper,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm aware of the urgency to record some of these teachings, folk songs that are still preserving these old folks or running against time to
Mhm.
record whatever
Yeah.
memory that they still have. And these
Right.
folk songs actually contain a lot of information about the history, the religion, the lifestyle, customs in the different villages in the Himalayas. And I think they can offer some wisdom for
Mhm.
the modern world and also to people who visit Ladakh in the
Yeah.
future. And hopefully my third project is to write a movie script at some point. I still, I want to film something in Ladakh, hopefully,
Mhm.
a story in the Himalayas. And my co-founder is a filmmaker.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, his name is Tenzin Gurmat, and he now lives in Japan during the winter time and summertime in Ladakh. So we're planning on filming something together in the future.
That's
Yeah.
really nice. I also share the same urgency of, documenting things, making videos about it or writing about it, etc. So that's really good. And it also highlights the importance of books
Mhm.
and documentation, etc. Which is, the podcast also aims to encourage people to read and to write. And I think it's still so relevant. It's more important than ever now to read. And yeah, I think that wraps up our podcast today. It was so lovely chatting with both of you.